The strange history of the goalpost. A football goalpost seems like the kind of thing that should not need a backstory. It just stands there, bright yellow, quiet, and familiar, with two arms reaching above the end zone. A kicker takes a few steps, the ball lifts into the air, and for a second, the whole stadium seems to stare at the same small space between the uprights. Then it is either good, wide left, wide right, or painfully short. But that clean yellow target was not always safely tucked away behind the end zone. For a long stretch of football history, it stood right in the middle of the danger, exactly where players sprinted, crashed, stretched, slipped, and piled into one another. The story of the goalpost begins before American football had fully separated itself from the older games that shaped it. Early football in North America still carried the fingerprints of rugby, soccer, and other kicking games that came before it. The fields were rougher. The rules were still being argued into shape. The equipment was basic, and the game had not yet become the polished, highly organized sport people recognize today. In that early world, kicking was not just a side feature, it was central. Before the forward pass became a major weapon, before playbooks turned into thick binders of formations and route combinations, the goal itself carried a kind of old-fashioned importance. Sending the ball through the uprights was one of the clearest ways to show control, skill, and territory. The first goalposts did not look like the smooth yellow tuning forks seen in modern stadiums. They were closer to a big H planted in the ground, two vertical posts with a horizontal crossbar running between them. The shape was simple because it had to be. It gave kickers something obvious to aim at, gave officials a clear way to judge whether the ball had passed through, and linked American football to older sports where kicking a ball over a bar and between posts had real meaning. On early fields, those posts could look heavy, plain, and almost homemade. They were not sleek pieces of stadium design. They looked more like a gate, a section of fencing, or a practical metal frame built to solve one basic problem. Where does the kick need to go? The odd part was not only the shape, it was the location. For much of early professional football, the goalposts were placed directly on the goal line instead of at the back of the end zone. That meant the same structure used to decide points was also sitting inside one of the most crowded and violent areas of the field. Picture an old football field on a cold afternoon, the turf chewed up, the uniforms heavier, the helmets made of leather, and the goal line packed with bodies. A runner lowers his shoulder and drives forward. A defender dives low. A receiver cuts across the end zone while someone chases him from behind. And right there, planted in the middle of all that movement, are the posts. They are not far away in the background. They are part of the traffic. The goal was not just a target for the kicker. It was something players had to avoid, use, fear, and sometimes hit. As football grew and changed, the goalpost quietly affected the way the game was played. Players learned its position the way a driver learns the shape of a narrow road. They ran near it, adjusted around it, and sometimes found ways to make it part of the action. Near the goal line, the post could act like an accidental screen. A receiver breaking across the end zone might force a defender to squeeze around the metal frame. A runner fighting for the last few feet could suddenly find one of the posts standing in the same space as the play. The goalpost was supposed to measure scoring, but in practice it could influence movement, angles, and strategy. It was an object on the field, and because it was on the field, the game had to bend around it. Football tried more than one solution. As college football and professional football developed their own rules and identities, the placement of the goalposts shifted more than once. Moving them to the back of the end zone cleared out the goal line and made the playing space feel safer and more open. But pro football, trying to create more scoring and reduce the number of tied games, later brought them forward again. That one change had a very real effect. A field goal became easier because the target was 10 yards closer. A team that stalled near the goal line still had a better chance to leave with points. But every benefit came with a cost. The posts were easier for kickers to reach, but they were also easier for players to crash into. Then the shape began to change. By the mid-1960s, football was no longer only a game for the people sitting in the stands. It had become a television event. The field needed to be readable from far away. A fan watching at home on a small screen needed to follow the flight of the ball. Stadium crowds were larger, athletes were faster, and almost every piece of football equipment was becoming more specialized. Around this period, the older H-shaped goalpost began giving way to the single support design, often called the slingshot or gooseneck style. This newer version looked almost strange the first time people saw it. Instead of two posts rising straight up from the ground, one main support held the crossbar and curved upward like a giant metal neck, with the uprights extending into the air above it. The design is often connected with Joel Rotman and Jim Trimble, who helped develop and promote a modern version in Canada before the idea spread more widely. It was cleaner to look at, less intrusive on the field, and better suited to a game that was trying to remove extra hazards without removing the drama of kicking. The goalpost still gave kickers the same kind of target, but it no longer looked like a fence planted in the middle of the action. The change was not just about style, it matched the direction football was already moving. The sport wanted fewer unnecessary collisions with fixed objects, and television wanted a clear, visible target that stood out on screen. Bright yellow paint helped the uprights pop against grey winter skies, dark crowds, stadium lights, and the blur of players moving underneath them. The goalpost became part of the visual identity of football. Even from the upper deck or from a living room couch with a game playing after dinner, a viewer could track the ball as it climbed toward that yellow frame. The most important shift came when the NFL finally moved the goalposts to the back of the end zone. By the 1970s, kickers had become more skilled, more powerful, and more specialized. Field goals were no longer rare last resort tries. They had become a routine part of how teams scored and managed games. Moving the post back made those kicks longer, but it also cleaned up the end zone. Receivers had more room to run routes. Quarterbacks had fewer strange obstacles to worry about. Defenders could move through the space without a metal frame standing near the middle of the play. A part of the field that had once been interrupted by steel suddenly felt open. That rule change quietly redrew the geometry of football. A short field goal was still manageable, but it was no longer quite as easy as before. A quarterback throwing near the goal line did not have to worry about a pass glancing off the post. A receiver cutting across the back of the end zone could focus on his route, the ball, and the defender, not a metal upright waiting in the path. Defenders did not have to navigate the same awkward landmark. The goalpost stopped acting like part of the play and became something cleaner and more exact, the final target beyond the play. The modern goalpost is built around precision. In the NFL, the crossbar sits 10 feet above the ground and the space between the uprights is 18 feet, 6 inches. From a distance, that opening can look generous, especially when the stadium is calm and the posts are just sitting there. But from the kicker's spot, with the defense rushing forward, the wind shifting, and the game possibly resting on one swing of the leg, that space can feel brutally narrow. The ball has to clear the bar and pass between the uprights. A few inches can turn a roar into a groan. One slight push of the kick can change the whole memory of a game. Its placement matters just as much as its size. Sitting on the end line, the goalpost stretches the drama beyond the painted end zone. The field has its 100 yards of contest. The end zones have their own 10 yards of pressure, and beyond that waits the yellow frame. It is not a decoration. It is a measuring tool for risk. Coaches think about it when deciding whether to go for it, punt, or try a field goal. Kickers build entire careers around learning how to send the ball through it from different distances and angles. Fans remember not only the kicks that went straight through, but also the ones that hit the upright, bounced off the crossbar, slipped barely inside, or missed by almost nothing. One of the strangest details is that the goalpost once behaved almost like an extra defender. Players could use it as a screen. Passes could hit it. Bodies could crash into it. It was part of the old texture of football, back when the end zone was not as clean and open as it feels now. Another hidden twist is the modern shape itself. The slingshot-style post looks like a more advanced invention, but the idea behind it is almost plain and practical. Take away what gets in the way and keep only the target. The goalpost began as a borrowed frame from older kicking games. It became a dangerous landmark in the most crowded part of the football field. Then, piece by piece, it was moved out of the action as the sport became faster, safer, and more exact. Today it stands behind the end zone, bright, still, and easy to overlook until the ball is in the air. Its history is not only about scoring points,